So, do you think there's a mistake that young adults make when it comes to mentorship? And what is it? And what can we do to change it?
Well, one of the things I would say is thinking they know everything. I was there once too, and I did that as well. So I'm not saying something that I didn't do, but it's really hard for young people to not feel like they're, invincible and they know it all and they can conquer the world, just by themselves. And you usually get humbled into learning that there's more to it. But I would say one, just being open to learning from other people and accepting the fact that you have a lot to learn is probably one of the biggest things that could be a mistake and that can kind of keep you from going further faster because you're not willing to sometimes just sit in the room and listen or observe or just like ask questions, around issues before you address them, get more points of view. So young people tend to not do that because you feel like you've been hired, you're this amazing person, and you must have been hired for all the answers that you come with. And so let's just go conquer the world, which is great. But you learn to moderate, and the more you moderate, the more successful I think you'll be. And the sooner you learn that, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah. And I just want to challenge you on one point because as you're saying that, I'm being young. I do think I know it all sometimes.
Right.
But I think sometimes as young adults, we're fearful of feedback, being critiqued.
Right.
So, how has that played a role in your development throughout your career and just life in general? And how can we become more accepting of feedback?
Yeah, well, criticism is always hard to take from anybody, right? And more so from people you don't know, right? You really don't know, or who really you think don't know you, I should
Mm,
say. So it becomes about thinking about how do I want to get to my better self, right? And so sometimes the criticism will come in forms that are not pretty or that aren't nice or that aren't, nicely, smooth so that your ego feels okay. But it becomes about really trying to get to your better self and objectively looking at the comments that are being made and always trying to step back from it and say, is there any truth to this? Is there anything real about what's being said? Is it partially true? Sometimes the criticism might be completely on, sometimes it might be partially on, sometimes it might not be good at all or really accurate at all. But as a part of starting to really learn yourself, you learn when to react to it and when not to, right? And sometimes it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna let this pass because I know that's not really accurate, right?
yeah.
But then there are other times where it's partially accurate or it's really accurate. And usually it's when it's either end of the spectrum that it's hardest to take, right?
Mm, yeah.
So you probably should have a clue that if I'm really, really responding to this on either end, it's probably one or the other.
Yeah.
It's accurate or it's very inaccurate, right? And if you have that fierce reaction to it, then you can look at it more from that perspective.
So, as women of color,
Right.
we often get the feedback that we are too aggressive or too bossy. Have you
Right.
ever gotten that feedback and how have you dealt with it?
Oh yeah. In fact, a boss of mine, I remember we were all sitting around the table and we had a group bonding exercise to do. And we all had to go around the room and write one positive about each person. And, everybody went around the room and wrote nice things about me, and that person wrote aggressive as the best thing he could find to say about me, right? And I was like, okay. And I could count by the numbers and know who wrote it. So it was. Um, and, it's just one of those things that over time you kind of just let roll off. And the reason you do is because at the end of the day, um, the word aggressive is just used more for women than it is for men, right? And especially, I think particularly African American women. So it becomes about whether or not you're going to be comfortable with the fact that you are seen essentially doing some of the same things as a guy would do in your position,
Mm,
just being coined something else, right? Because for me, if I am a go-getter and I want to make a lot of sales around some technology product, and I'm going after the sales. If you want to call me aggressive, you can, but you might call another guy, a go-getter, or, rainmaker, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
right? And in my opinion, at that point, I know that if I'm doing as well as he is, then I'm really a rainmaker. So if somebody's calling me aggressive, that's their issue. That's their cross to bear. I'm not going to carry it with me. But it takes time.
Yeah.
Because I still remember that story, and it still sticks with me, because I'm like, wow, that's the best you could do, But you just kind of have to learn to let it roll off and kind of replace other words that are accurate.
Yeah.
I don't even bother anymore having a conversation about trying to correct it, because it's not my cross to bear.
Yeah, that's an awesome mindset. So I have one more question, and then I have some like rapid fire questions,
Oh
right?
God.
So my last question, like we talk about a lot how mentorship really comes in handy when you're in a room and you don't see people who look like you.
Right.
What's one piece of advice you can give for that next young Black girl who's about to walk into a room? And it can be anyone, but I'm Black,
Right.
you're Black, so
Right,
that's
right.
fine. Walk into a room, what's their piece of advice to thrive in any room?
Right. Yeah, I always say this, and I say it's being authentically you, right? You will often find yourselves in a certain situation where you happen to have made it to a certain point, not because you were somebody else, right? And so you really have to own that you're you, and there's something unique and special about you that brings you to that room in the first place, right? You didn't just show up there, you didn't just get dropped in there. You worked really hard, you convinced people to go along with you on certain journeys, whatever the case may be, you brought something to the table.
Yeah.
And so you really have to own that and say, okay, in owning that, I come to the table with something different, something unique. And the research now backs this up, where when we have more diverse teams, right, we get better results financially, bottom line numbers, right? So you also need to own that, right? You all need to own that your diverse background coming to the table increases the bottom line. And when you own both of those, then it's kind of hard for people to put you in a box and you stay there.
Yeah, very true. I love that. I love that. It's like you got in a room because something about you was worth being in that room. So
Right.
just like continue to believe you're worthy.
Right.